Hello, welcome to Tales from the Bridge. My name is Tristan.
My name is Sam.
I'm Kevin.
And I'm James.
I'll start us off with a quick science fiction science fact about Jurassic Park and direwolves.
It was my book of the month, and we read Faith of Beasts by James S.A. Corey, so stand by for that.
Before we talk about that, we're going to check out the other things that we have been reading and watching.
And it's going to be my pick of the month this month, so stick around to the end of the show to find out what I've selected for us to read. And don't forget to subscribe to our podcast if you like this type of content, and come to our website at talesfromthebridge.com, where you can comment on our episodes, read transcripts, play video games, and interact with us. We'd love to hear from you.
All right, let's make our way over to the bridge.
So I'd like to talk about Jurassic Park for science fiction science fact. It is, I think, science fiction, right? It's very sciencey and it's very fictional and it's very, very popular. And one of the key things in that movie was them finding a mosquito embedded inside of ancient amber. And inside of that mosquito was a little piece of blood from which they were able to extract some DNA. And once they were able to extract that DNA, they were able to clone some of the big, scary dinosaurs. And of course, what they had to do was backfill some of the missing DNA, because DNA actually has a half-life, and as it ages, it degrades. So in the movie, they used frog DNA to backfill it. And presumably because a frog is, I don't know, lizard-like. It is an amphibian. I'm not entirely sure why they picked frogs, but they did. And through that process, they were able to incubate and create a bunch of dinosaurs and let them loose on an island to terrorize people, much to the entertainment of the audience. And I bring this up because there's a company called Colossal Biosciences based in Dallas, Texas, that has done something similar. And not with dinosaurs, but with something I would say is kind of more timely and maybe a little bit cooler for those who've watched Game of Thrones. They've de-extincted, I don't think that's actually a word, but that's what I'm calling it. They've de-extincted a dire wolf. And so for those who don't know, a dire wolf is a very large wolf. It has a prominent role in the Game of Thrones series, and they have done it. In fact, they made two different dire wolves. They named them Romulus and Remus, and some of you may have heard of this before, but it's an interesting thing because these are actually not based on it's based on a gray wolf, and they gave it traits of a dire wolf based on ancient DNA that they found, a tooth that they found from roughly 13,000 years ago, and an inner ear bone from roughly 72,000 years ago. And they used the CRISPR DNA editor, gene editor, that you may be familiar with, and they edited 20 different genes, and they gave them these different characteristics. So they said that they've done phenotype de-extinction, but kind of, I think they're just monkeying with animals and changing their DNA in a way that sounds kind of popular and exciting. So very science fiction-y, very science facty, because it actually happened. Are we playing God, you guys? Is this a good idea? Did they actually de-extinct dire wolves, or is this just a bunch of media mumbo jumbo?
In what you read about this, Kevin, was there, and I think it's impressive. It's incredibly impressive. I mean, it would have been, I think, cooler if they had gone the Jurassic Park route and put the direwolf DNA in a frog or something like that and seen what they got then. That would be really playing God then. But
ribbit?
Yeah, exactly right. Is there a stated end goal? Like, do they have actual applications that they're thinking about using this for, or is it we're doing it just because we can or we want to, or what did you see?
I think that this was a proof of concept to show that they could do it, and it's kind of a vanity project. I think it's a vanity
Right.
project. That's as far as I can tell to show what they can do with CRISPR and gene editing.
Ecosystems have moved on, right? Like we don't really need dire wolves in any of our ecosystems as far as I can tell. And it just sounds like human history and cane toads in Australia over and over and over again. But yeah, I mean, again, it's mind-boggling how intelligent and creative some people can be. But again, it all comes back to why. So yeah.
Wasn't there news about the woolly mammoth? Because that seems like Timu Jurassic Park. Like, let's just let's just bring just a woolly mammoth back and have it at a zoo, and people would still want to go look at the woolly mammoth if they could.
It's true. Although apparently, interestingly, the Toronto Zoo and the Association of Zoos and Aquariums have warned against exhibiting de-extinct animals.
Amazing, perfect.
I don't know. It feels like, I mean, just looking at it quickly, there's a potential for advancing conservation technology or protecting endangered species against climate change, maybe, and restructuring them, re-editing them. I don't know. Like, is this the future, anyways? Like, in terms of, I think James briefly mentioned, someone mentioned space travel. Like, will we need to edit ourselves for long-term, you know, space journeys? Could we edit our genomes to eliminate cancer or to be immune to diseases and things that um, you know, ravage us now? You know, can we fix, I don't know, heart disease or something like that with this sort of thing? I feel like it's a route worth pursuing. It feels like hard to comment. I feel like unqualified to comment on it. Like, in a way, it's one of those. I know the science is behind it. It's way over my head. It seems cool. Do I want a dire wolf? 100%.
I
Yes.
feel like that's the question we should be
Yes.
answering. Do we want a direwolf? Heck
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. And I
I want
want
to be like Jon Snow and
totally. I want them pulling. I want to. I kind of want 10 of them pulling me on a chariot to go for coffee.
wearing
Let's
some
do
big
this.
fur coat and like a scepter.
Absolutely. Thank you. Kevin is with me. Yeah. So if that's the end goal, I might be sold on it. But I think, like, I'm not worried about playing God because I'm not sure there is one. For me, it's not a religious issue. So you start to parse out, like, what are the classic issues of DNA restructuring, and everyone's like, you can't play God. We're like, well, let's give it a shot because we could maybe do some good. And so that's not a. I don't have a spiritual concern with it. So is there an environmental problem? Can we get into other types of ethical issues?
Has reminded me of cloning and cloning technology and Dolly. And I just was curious and looked up Dolly. Dolly lived, remember Dolly the sheep, the first
Yeah.
cloned
Yeah.
creature, or at least mammal. She lived for 7 years. So I was curious, what pain are you causing a creature that you invent that very well just might live a life of pain and just a horrible life, right? That's an ethical question. Dolly looks pretty happy, and she lived for 7 years. So I don't know ethically. There's a fine line between this, right? Like if we're bringing back extinct animals and cloning, there's a I don't know. That's where I think it goes a bit too far with cloning, I think. But then at the same time, cloning could very well help with the curing of disease and like
Including
also not
including
smart enough
armies.
to know what to to know how to tackle this one.
Well, I mean, the thing here is it's basically a designer dog, right? Like, let's say you wanted a Chihuahua with purple hair and antennas. Like, maybe that's a bit extreme, but I think that's essentially what they're doing here is they're creating a dog that you could have that's not created by nature. And there's a market for that, right? Sam and I are obvious clients for these people for our team of dire wolves.
Yes.
And I think that's what they're trying to show here is that they've got that ability and they can take a gray wolf and modify it in some way. And that's I guess the thing about cloning too is that cloning was designed by natural selection, right? That sheep, Dolly, was designed by eons of evolution, and this dire wolf like Grey Wolf, wasn't. So maybe there are some physiological issues with modifying those 20 genes. So when they get to age 4, maybe they have liver problems or they get cancer of the uterus. I mean, who knows what the situation could be. So that's where I kind of wonder. Like, there's unintended consequences that could come from it. That's maybe one of the ethical issues.
Yeah, I think the unintended consequence there is probably right on the money. If it's a technology that's hard to understand why and yet has some profound effect on and could have some profound effect, yeah, like proceed with caution. Though we don't do that nowadays, do we? With technology, we just kind of
No.
push through.
And with all that said, I still want my team of direwolves.
I do too. Yeah, that has not changed. I would happily accept the risks. Yeah.
Or woolly mammoth. I'd take a woolly mammoth or two as well. They could pull my car through the snow any day.
Tied up out back.
I want like a chicken with the head of a pug.
That would be excellent. I've got this
Now,
visual image of that.
now who's talking about ethical considerations? It crosses the line for me, I think.
The existence of pugs is almost an ethical conundrum in itself.
Yeah.
Yeah, people love those things, but have you heard them breathe up close? I don't know.
And for the record, James, I think you would ride a woolly mammoth rather than have it pull you.
That's
I think
actually
that
a good point.
Yeah.
That's a good point. Yeah, I would have to get some sort of a hempen ladder or something that would just hang off the side that I could climb up every day.
Bareback straddle. Yeah.
Yeah, totally.
Let's move into what else we've been reading and watching. And I'll get us started. I finished our last book of the month and read Platform Decay by Martha Wells. And I recommend it. If you like the series, you will like this book. It's got everyone's favorite smartass, anxiety-driven BattleBot is in fine form, and it was a totally fun read. My only wish is that I had sort of delayed it until I was at the beach. Perfect beach read. It's ideal for sitting on the dock or somewhere out on vacation, wherever you go on vacation, or take some time to yourself this summer. I definitely recommend. We also watched The Burrows. Had some input from the Duffer Brothers, and definitely you can feel their fingerprints all over this show. It's on Netflix. It's got an 80s sort of old people dealing with monsters vibe, and a lot of fun. It was easy family watching, and a great cast. Some people you haven't seen in a while, and I'm glad they graced the screen again for this. So yeah, how about you guys?
I got to follow up with that because I also read that book and I don't think we connected about this, but yeah, I read it and I love this series. Network Effect was a Hugo and a Nebula Award winner, and this was the latest in the series. Great, just like you said, Sam. It was a perfect beach read, and every page or every moment that I was listening to it, it sort of scratched the itch that the rest of the season or the rest of the series had. For those who haven't seen it, the TV show is actually also quite good, and it's on Apple TV. And I've worked my way through the first season, and the second season of it is coming out sometime either late this year or early 2027. It doesn't follow exactly the books, but elements of the storyline are in it, and the characters are there, and it's the same kind of feel. So, yeah, Sam, funny, we were aligned on that one.
I don't have much to report reading wise. I've been doing a little bit of a palate cleanse with non-sci-fi things lately, but I did have a movie that just on a whim I watched the other day. And Tristan, this kind of ties into your Stephen King kick that you've been on lately. I had never seen the 2017 adaptation of The Dark Tower, and I remembered having really enjoyed the books back when they first came out, but for whatever reason I hadn't watched the movie. I think because it looked like it was going to be a disappointment compared to the books. And I'm sad to report it kind of was. Like, again, who knows what goes on in the minds of Hollywood deal makers other than, dreams of dollar bills or $100 bills or $1,000 bills. But with a cast, the leads were Idris Elba, fantastic. Matthew McConaughey, fantastic. But this was something that should have been, like an HBO or Showtime or FX extended series, but instead they crammed it into less than 2 hours for a feature film, and as a result, it was just paper thin. It really was sort of, I thought, very pedestrian and run of the mill kind of sci-fi story. A lot of bang bang shoot 'em up stuff because the protagonist is named the Gunslinger, which is kind of what you want and expect. But it was just disappointing. To me, it was like there was so much potential, and King had laid out such a weird, tonally rich potential story that a real kind of Game of Thronesy kind of treatment would have been fantastic, but we got a feature, so yeah, maybe in the future, who knows.
I have done a couple of TV shows recently. One show that I watched recently, I finally finished actually, Blake Seven, which is a late 70s, early 80s British television show. Super campy, awesome science fiction. It's ridiculous. The acting is so hilarious. The team, they just bicker with each other all the time. It's really overdone, but I love 70s TV and I loved Blake Seven. I wouldn't recommend it to anyone to be like, you got to see this show unless you're already into campy sci-fi from the 70s. But anyone out there who likes Blake Seven, love to hear from you. Apparently, it was the most watched TV show in Great Britain when it was on in the late 70s, early 80s, which is really interesting to think about. And I'll name another TV show that I started to watch. I have never seen Taken, the miniseries from 2002, the Spielberg production. So I guess he was a producer on the show. And I'm just ready for Disclosure Day. I'm super excited. I'm a very nerdy Spielberg fanboy, and I'm just going down the rabbit hole. I'm even listening to Spielberg's biography right now. And just by the time this episode comes out, Disclosure Day will have been out for about a week or so. So I'm sure we'll talk about it on one of our film episodes or book episodes. But I just wanted to get ready for that, and kind of, I don't think it's Taken the miniseries is not really connected to the new film, but you can kind of imagine it is in a way, and maybe it kind of is open, and that's the thing is we're not quite sure. It's not a Disclosure Day is not a direct sequel to Taken or Close Encounters of the Third Kind, but it's it's starting to look like they're just kind of in the same. They happened, right? They happened adjacent or in some way. But I shouldn't speculate too much since don't see it for a few more days. But yeah, on a huge Spielberg kick, and yeah, watching TV shows. It's
For those
refreshing.
who haven't heard of Blake Seven, it's worthwhile Googling because I just did when you mentioned it, and I said never heard of it before. And I see what you mean about the campy. The photos are amazing. Like they're just
Oh yeah.
extremely exactly what you would imagine as a sci-fi show from that time period. Cheesy but awesome. Cheesy but awesome.
So good it's bad, and it's amazing.
So this month it was my book of the month, and I decided to go into the second installment of The Captive's War, The Faith of Beasts by James S.A. Corey. These are the authors of The Expanse, who we've lauded at great length on this show. And this was part two of a series that the first installment was sort of met with mixed reviews. People have kind of known this duo for The Expanse, which is a sort of, you know, multi-storyline space opera, action-packed kind of romp, and this is different. The first book was a kind of a slow world-building burn, and I think fans of The Expanse kind of forgot the first book was a little bit like that too, where it was kind of a slow burn in The Expanse because they had to sort of set the table, and they did that here, and I predicted correctly, and I'll take full credit to say that that's what they were doing. The second book would be a broadening of that scope, and that's in fact what what happened. And so I don't want to get too much into it, but I really, now the story, the characters that you get introduced to, who are held captive by an alien species and sort of put to work, are now being used as tools for this empire's expansion across the universe that's been created. And yeah, I'd love to hear what you guys thought of it.
Yeah, I agree. It was unmistakably much slower than I expected. The first book, that is. And I was a little lukewarm on it. I remember having some mixed feelings about The Mercy of Gods and not feeling it was like almost a little bit incomplete and a little bit unsatisfying. I mean, it was dramatic and there were big things going on and interesting things. And the writing is excellent. I mean, these guys under the name of James Corey are fantastic writers. But that book in particular just didn't quite grab me. So I was very relieved to see The Faith of Beasts turn that around and go up a gear a little bit. There was some action, there was activity, there was even a little bit of hope in places, and seeing characters develop and be put into new scenarios, and rather than just sort of operating on the Carrick's homeworld, the fact that they were being sent out with other alien species on these scientific expeditions or military expeditions was interesting, and again, it raised stakes for the individuals and certainly brought a level of interest to every one of those particular stories. That's the other angle here is that there's a lot of POVs in this book. There's a lot of different characters that we see through their eyes. I think my favorite of all of them was the character Jessen, who was sent to scout a world, and which is just called the world in Carrick's lingo. But I'm not going to give anything away. I'm going to avoid spoilers on this because I think it's something that you can sort of see coming at a certain point, but it's definitely a good development of the story and a good turnaround of things. Yeah, for me, that was the most interesting and compelling of the subplots. One interesting aspect of these books, too, for me, I find there's very little technobabble. Like, is it just me, or there's not a lot of sort of pseudo-scientific gobbledygook that goes around in these books? There's a little bit of talk about, asymmetric space, which I guess is their hyperspace or warp drive version. And there's a little bit of, in talking about weapons and science tech. But there's not a lot of that sort of Star Trek-y technobabble to trip over. So, which is kind of interesting. The most heavy descriptors, I think, comes in the cultural and structural language that the Carricks apply to themselves and also to their organization of the other alien species that are under their insectoid boot heels, like the human moiety. I think this was the first time I'd ever actually learned the word moiety. I'd never heard that word prior to this book, and I think I have a decent vocabulary, but yeah, they pulled out moiety. So I'm curious to see where this goes. I wish in a funny way that they had almost maybe taken the first quarter of this book and tacked it on to the end of the first book, just to give it a little more hope and a little more something to complete that first book. But this is definitely a move in the right direction, and I'm very curious to see how the human moiety does in the third and supposedly final book of the series.
I don't believe it'll be the final book. They like to call these trilogies, and then they like to keep pumping them out. Well, we'll see. I guess it's going to come down to how popular it is. So it is interesting, James, that you mentioned about a lack of techno babble, because typically I like techno babble, and I didn't notice that. And I think that the storyline, because it was so outlandishly out there, it sort of draws you in as a science fiction fan, even without a lot of techno babble. And yeah, I agree. I'm not going to also talk about the plot turn with Jessen and what she finds, but that plot twist does make the story more epic. Like, it suddenly becomes this series can be very huge compared to what the first book would have implied, because the first book did feel kind of almost insular, being stuck on that one planet, and now we can see that it can be a whole lot more than that. In particular, around the swarm who was introduced in the first book, and what that character means. Anyway, so interesting future opportunities for this series for sure. I think my favorite of the characters was, I don't know if you remember, but Ricker and Kampar were off with the military fleet. And they met that alien named Vadai, which is a slug-like alien creature. And he just had so much. He was awesome. He's a military strategist, as far as I can tell, and he is used by the Carracks for his military stratagems. And all he wants to do is answer questions, and Ricker and Kompar are along for the ride, and they actually have probably the most exciting fight sequence or escape sequence of the whole book, in that particular part. And it was a good page turner at that point. Um, as always, I'm looking for some satisfaction, and I would love to get a little bit more. And as you said, Sam, I think you got to get farther into the series before you get that satisfaction. And I won't say any more than that for anybody who hasn't read it. But yeah, I liked it definitely more than Mercy of Gods. And I will certainly read the next one.
Well, I'll start off by saying I am happy to read this series because I do think it's really neat to have a series come out and talk about it within a few months of it coming out. I think we're lucky to do that with a Corey book. I think I'll start off by saying my experience with reading the first Expanse book was that the first half of that book, I was a little bit like, is this just a murder mystery? But I really liked the first book, Leviathan Wakes, by the time I was done. And I also felt like I loved all of those characters. So I am comparing it to my experience with the Expanse series. I loved most of those characters by the end of that book. I was like, they were so fun to be with. I didn't find that with the first book, The Mercy of Gods, from this series that we're reading now. And I'm going to be honest, this one was a bit tough for me. I had to kind of push myself to keep reading. I did physically read this, and I just finished the last 40 pages today. Just pushed through that. And it was my favorite 40 pages of the book for sure, because it's not like a big twist ending, but a little bit more is revealed. That's like, okay, so let's see this happen. I'm not partial to any of the characters. Like even Daffod, who I think we're supposed to be behind. I mean, he kind of seems like a James Holden with less personality. There's not much going on with Daffod. And Jessen was kind of cool, but there's still not much for me, at least. I don't know. Campar, I liked him because he ended up finding a lover, and their relationship was kind of neat. And the slug Vidai, yeah, he was also kind of quippy. He was the funniest character in the whole book, but he was barely in it. So I didn't attach to any characters. I felt like there were many chapters that I didn't know why, like kind of nothing for me, nothing much happened in that chapter. And I'm going, well, what was that chapter there for? So I'm probably missing something, and I'm just going to say that the series is not for me because however, I still like it and I still want to follow it. It's not hitting me hard. It's not getting me really excited, but at the same time, I do want to see where it goes because I want to see the Carracks go down. Like I want to, I'm rooting for the human moiety, and I want to see the Carracks go down. So I'm definitely along for the ride, but I'm a little bit like, well, hold on, I loved the Expanse series, but I didn't like the first one too much. I was a bit bored, and then this one I felt the same thing. So I don't know I can't put my finger on what's missing, except for I can pinpoint that the characters didn't really grab me. Like there's nothing that interesting. And I do like how dark it is. Like the whole idea of they have to make children now, that's cool. And then towards the end, we get a bit deeper into that. It's really dark, imagining bringing children into this prison, basically. And I like the idea of one of the things that I read today was really neat. What bird would still survive the long term through thousands of years more than any other bird? And the answer was the chicken. And it's because the humans, we need them. So we protect them, and the chicken survives more than a bald eagle or a hawk, which is the predator. So I like that angle because that's what the Carrings are doing to humans, right? Like the only reason we're surviving is because they're keeping us. So there are some good takeaways, but in terms of the book turning the pages for me, I don't know. I wanted more from the swarm. What's the swarm? Why are you talking about the swarm in the first book and the second book, but we still don't know what's going on with that? I get it that we're in for the long haul, which does make me think we're going past 3 books because it's like you can't wrap this up in a third book. There's too much missing from the first and second book for me to think you can end it on a third. And I'm sorry to be a downer. I'm sorry, Sam. I enjoy reading this series, and but I'm wondering what am I missing because something's not grabbing me with these 2 books.
I have a suggestion. I think it might be hope. Like there's not a ton of hope definitely not in the first book. In the second book, there's more, just I'll say the words, the deathless enemy. And that I think is going to be where the hope comes from. And I agree. Like we don't kind of see that. The other thing is there's this imperial collaboration theme throughout where you've got these Carricks that we hate, and yet the humans are all just collaborating as best we can, and we're not doing anything to explicitly fight them, obviously, because they don't want to die, but it's just so off-putting. And so there's a lot of things here, the lack of hope and the imperial collaboration that, for me anyway, definitely was noteworthy. And yeah, I mean, I hear what you're saying, Tristan.
Mhm.
It's not going to stop me from reading it, though.
Yeah, I agree. I see what you're saying because it's not, they're not crew, right? They're not this sort of lovable crew, romping across space. Like they're strangers who've been thrown into boot camp together and forced to survive, right? And find relationships that way. And so I think for me, I thought the pacing sped up and found its feet, and then these characters, are put into situations where we have to wonder how we would do ourselves in similar circumstances, right? How would I function in this? And I think that gets played out like in the like even in the action sequences, right? There's kind of an oblique approach where the characters have no control over the events that impact them. And so you kind of get that sense of helplessness. So there isn't, Kevin just said, there isn't hope, right? It is a hopeless sort of situation that they're thrown into, and it's a bit like reading The Road, right? Like there's not a lot of upticks, and then now, but they've sort of started to sort of inject some positivity, like who was the character that you like, Kevin? He was my favorite too, and I forget the name. Vidal? Is that right?
But
Pronouncing
Viday, I think
Viday?
Vidai would be the slug
Vadai,
creature.
Vadai. Yeah.
Yeah, I thought that character's kind of funny, but I also for the record, I mistakenly read Carrie X as Carrie X, right? Like Sarah, the Carrie X. Anyway, so my pronunciation suffers, but I am also worried that they'll wrap it up too quickly. If this trilogy rumor holds true, this feels like a universe with more than 1 book left in it, and I'd hate to see them rush to a resolution and turn this into like the final season of Game of Thrones, but for now, for me, it feels unfamiliar. It still feels new. I don't think I've read this book before, and I think that's where its strength lies. I just hope they give it space to breathe and sort of go out, expand like the Expanse. I don't know.
You hit it right there, though, when you said you haven't read a book like this. And I'm thinking, no, I haven't either. I haven't read a book where characters are in this prison and we've got the ultimate bad guy, which is like they're unbeatable, or so it seems. That's a really interesting concept because usually we need a bad guy that can be beat. And for 2 books now, it seems like they can't. So it's still maybe that, yeah. But I'll also include, I remember last time when we did The Mercy of Gods, after talking about it with you guys, I kind of got back in, was like, no, no, no. Like I was missing things and you guys helped me bring it back. So I can tell that's almost happening right now where your enthusiasm and your description of parts and character are going, no, yeah, that's right. So sometimes that happens when we get together. And I love that how when we talk about it, I'm able to look at it with fresh eyes a little bit more and go, oh, that's right. So keep doing that.
Though, to be fair, my risk of bias is grand here. I liked The Expanse so much that I'm rooting for this so badly that it could be, a couple years from now, I could circle back on this series once it's all done, when the 5 to 6 books finally come out, and I'll be like, oh, actually, I didn't like that. I don't know. I doubt that. I do feel like if I'm reading something new, I'm gonna and something I feel like I haven't read before or watched before, my enthusiasm level immediately jumps. And I also felt that with The Expanse. I don't know that The Expanse had a ton of comparators, elements for sure, murder mystery and certain things like that. But then I don't know what to compare it to. We've read a fair amount of sci-fi at this point, so I think these are two authors doing pretty, doing their own thing, and carving out their own space in the genre.
It'll be a good ride for sure. I do want to ask you guys, are there any theories? Do you have any ideas of what the swarm is?
I'm pretty sure the swarm is related to the deathless enemy. That's my take. Not wanting to say much more than that.
Yeah, I think it's a part of one, and it needs to grow and evolve on its own, but that's all they could sneak in, right? So it's just the smallest
Oh, nice.
little
Yeah.
seed to plant, and it's a long-term strategy. That seed's got to grow and hopefully bear some fruit, and
And I agree. I think it is more than almost definitely linked to the Deathless Enemy. But an interesting character, and then I think, or characters, should I say, tied up in one. I also just wanted to mention something. Again, as you just said, Tristan, in these discussions, we often illuminate aspects that we hadn't thought of, and even though it was sort of obvious and integral, Kevin, you mentioned the whole imperial collaboration angle, that anyone who hasn't read this book, that's a good way to go into looking at this, that this is what's happening, and it is definitely more of a book about politics than it is about sci-fi pew pew action. It is a political movement kind of story that is going to be one with brains and not brawn, I think, or lasers, but maybe a bit of both. And it's a story which again is awfully terrible that we have to contemplate this again in this day and age. But a lot of people are talking about, what do you do against an enemy that is, or even not an enemy, but an adversary that will resort to violence at the drop of a hat. That violence is their first and last resort, and I think it's a good sort of meditation on that. So, yeah. And as far as the pronunciation goes, I wanted to mention as well, shout out to Jefferson Mays, who did the narration on the audiobook. This was a rare one for me that I just purely listened to it. I didn't read it all, purely listened, but I thought Jefferson Mays took a hefty tome and did an admirable job in converting that to audiobook.
So this month it's my pick for book of the month, and I'm going to pick a book that has been very well received in terms of awards, and I loved it. I've read it a long time ago, and I've forgotten almost everything about it, but um, it is actually a short story, no, a collection of short stories, and I don't think we've done too many of those. So this one is by a gentleman by the name of Ted Chiang. And he is very well known for his short stories. In fact, it is the bulk of his writing. He's done two collections of short stories, one in 2002 and one in 2019. And I was going back and forth on which one to do, but my favorite of the two is his 2019 work. And it's called Exhalation, with a subtitle of Stories. So Exhalation: Stories. And it has a number of short stories that have all individually won both Hugo Awards and Nebula Awards. In fact, four of them have won both Hugo and a Nebula or a Locust Award. So I won't list them all, but reading the titles brings me back to the topics of them, and each one of them are real head shakers. I think that was Tristan's description or something like that. They're all very very different and wildly creative and just written so well from the perspective of whatever world he's envisioning. And he does such a good job of putting them together into little short stories. So I don't want to taint it too much by being overly positive about it, but I really enjoyed this series, a series of short stories, and I hope you guys do too. Although I think some of you guys have read it. I'm not entirely sure. So it is 2019 Exhalation by Ted Chiang.
Great choice. I have not read, but I know that Ted is a great author, and I think a collection of short stories is a nice way to shake things up. So yeah, good pick.
Yeah. Thank you for joining us today. Next episode is a film club episode, and we're talking about A New Hope and probably a bunch of Star Wars stuff. So join us for that one. A couple interviews after that with some fantastic authors. Lots more to come in the future. Until next time.